Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. When Debbie called me and asked me to come speak at your meeting here in June, we were discussing topics and what you guys might want me to talk about. And the first thing that came up, obviously, was to recap the legislative session that ended earlier this month, which I'm happy to do, and I can do it fairly quickly, which is to say that very little good happened. And that's not an overwhelming surprise. Our legislature, as it currently sits, it's not the worst legislature we've had in Louisiana. In fact, if you stretch back through time, the current makeup of the House and Senate are probably better than most. But in our system, when you have a governor who is opposed to most of what we want to see happen in Louisiana, the legislature really doesn't have as much power as they should to do things. And frankly, we don't have enough quality legislators, particularly in the Senate at this point, to make that happen. And as such, what you saw was there was a bill that would have done a lot to change the way we process personal injury cases arising from car accidents in Louisiana, which probably would have had the effect of reducing car insurance rates in the state, which as of right now are, I want to say, the second highest in the country and the least affordable in the country when you index Louisiana's car insurance rates versus our per capita income. This is the worst place in the country to try to get car insurance. And this is the subject of a great deal of argumentation among people of various walks of life. One of the arguments that you'll hear constantly, and if you want to engage in this, I'll give you a little bit of a pointer on how to do it, is to say the reason that that car insurance is so high in Louisiana is basically the insurance companies are raking everybody over the coals. You'll hear this on and on and on, especially from people who are opposed to the idea of tort reform. The answer to that is a question, which is to ask them this: well, why is it that nationwide insurance, which their very name indicates that they write insurance nationwide, doesn't write insurance in Louisiana? If insurance companies get to rake everybody in America in Louisiana over the coals, and their rates are so high because they want them to be, then how come Nationwide's not in on the game, right? Ask that question and you're going to get a lot of stumbling and mumbling for an answer. Fact is, Louisiana is the highest, has the highest incidence of personal injury lawsuits arising from car wrecks in America. We are relatively high in the number of car wrecks, but we're not top 5. We are not, I don't believe right now, top 5 in the number of uninsured drivers. I don't know that there's anything particularly different in Louisiana in terms of things like distracted driving. I think it's a problem everywhere in the country. Our roads are terrible, but as I understand it, that's not a major driver of insurance rates. It's the fact that virtually everyone who gets in a car wreck has a soft tissue injury in Louisiana. We are the most delicate people on the planet. We do some of the hardest work that you can imagine. We got people offshore on oil rigs. We're laying pipe in the Haynesville shale. We work at chemical plants where things could blow up at any minute. And yet, boy, you get an offender bender in this state. Life as you know it is going to end, and you got to call Dr. Plants to make sure that and this is reflected in the fact that if you drive on the interstate from the airport to Denham Springs, from 110 to 10 to 12, you will see no less than 11 billboards for Gordon McKay. That's going one way. If you turn around and drive back to the airport, you will see 11 more facing the other way. which is like one of the things that happened in the legislature was, and this was more of an exercise in trolling than policy making. Conrad Appel, who's a senator, and Jack McFarland, who's a representative in the House, both brought bills that would basically attack the billboard industry and say, if you're going to do, like you can't have billboards less than 2,000 feet apart. If you're going to put up a billboard, then your office has to be within 3 miles of where the billboard is. A whole bunch of stuff that was probably unconstitutional, but it was totally aimed at Morris Bart and Gordon McKernan. I mean, and they knew they weren't going to pass it. They just wanted to do it to make mischief, right? These guys did this. And the trial lawyers weren't even the ones that cried foul. I mean, they did. But the loudest people in this whole thing was Lamar. They were like, wait, what was this? What are you doing? I mean, I got this, the longest email that I've ever got was from Lamar's governmental affairs guy. And he's like, you gotta write an article. Like, I'm not writing an article about this thing. It's gonna get killed the first committee it goes in. I just think it's funny. He's like, it's not funny, it's a direct assault on the First Amendment. I'm like, whatever. So, anyway, let's face it, the billboard lawyers won this year, and your car insurance rates, even though if you have, there's a couple companies, if you have car insurance through your rates, are actually going to go down this year a little bit, which is a miracle. But I don't think it's going to change the fact that we're still in a major pickle where that stuff is concerned. And even though most of us can afford car insurance, the thing you got to think about is people that are in the logging industry. You got trucking companies that take, say, sugar cane to the refinery. And there's a bunch of other pieces of our economy that are heavily involved in transportation, and they are getting absolutely killed right now on car insurance. And it's a major problem in the state's economy. So it has to be addressed. It has to be addressed next year because we will not grow our economy to match that of the rest of the country until this is taken care of. And you would think that somebody running for re-election as governor would look for solutions on this, and you'd be wrong because they fought every single attempt to do something about it. We did pass a bill that would do something about pre-existing conditions for folks that might lose their insurance in the event, which is very likely that Obamacare is going to be found unconstitutional. I'm sure y'all probably know most of the story about this. Basically what happened is there's a multi-state lawsuit that's been filed by, I want to say 19 different states. Essentially arising from the fact that the Trump administration now says that they're not going to enforce the individual mandate in Obamacare. There was a previous case in which, I think it was at the Supreme Court level, they said that the individual mandate was a tax, and this is the whole John Roberts ruling, and everybody got mad at Roberts over this. Well, when the Trump administration said they're not going to enforce the mandate, the legal theory is, okay, well that makes the entire bill unconstitutional. And I'm not going to drag you in the weeds on why that is. A whole bunch of attorneys general across the country said, time to go get Obamacare. And they had a federal judge in Texas that actually ruled for them. So Jeff Landry brings Louisiana into the suit. And John Bel Edwards lost his mind. This is back last, I guess November of last year he did this. 850,000 people are going to get put off of their insurance because they got pre-existing conditions. The whole thing was ridiculous. It's about 90,000 people, most of whom can be taken care of fairly easily with some tweaks to how we do health insurance in the state. So there was a bill brought by Fred Mills, who is the chair of the Senate Health and Welfare Committee. Basically, he got together with Taylor Barra, Jim Donlin, and Kirk Talbot, and Jeff Landry, and they put this piece of legislation together and passed it with 38 votes in the Senate and 90 votes in the House. And John Bel Edwards screamed and yelled the entire time. And then, of course, the bill passes, and he's got no choice but to sign it, because if he vetoes it, they're going to override the veto, which doesn't happen in Louisiana, but it absolutely would happen this year. So he signs it and immediately starts taking credit for the bill. That's our governor. Really, those were kind of the most important things that happened in the state. I mean, I could get into the whole issue that actually Scott McKnight's got covered pretty well. If you've seen his latest little, I guess it's a campaign commercial, you just put it on Facebook. Okay. What we found out was that Scott actually keeps almond milk in his kitchen, which, I don't know. But basically what we did was we made sure that you can't call almond milk in Louisiana. Because this was a really important public policy thing that needed to be done, was to make sure we're not talking about cauliflower rice in Louisiana or almond milk. We wanted to make sure that, did we actually pass the Who Dat Nation highway bill? I think that actually got killed, but we spent a lot of time debating that. Really important stuff at the legislature. Didn't do anything on taxes, didn't do anything on economic growth, none of that. Almost passed fantasy sports in Louisiana, didn't do that. So it was really kind of a waste of a session. And it's a waste of a session basically because you lack leadership. Louisiana has a leadership deficit that is as bad or worse now than it has been since we've all been here. And that's saying a lot, because Louisiana has almost always had a leadership deficit. In the few times when we've actually had leadership at the top, largely they've gotten disinterested. Right? If you'll remember, Mike Foster, who was a pretty good governor, spent his second term at Southern Law School and riding his motorbike around the state because he figured, I've done enough. And I don't even know what Bobby Jindal did. Other than that, you got Kathleen Blanco, you got John Bell Edwards, you got Edwin Edwards and his various federal indictments that he had. So we don't do leadership in this state. And that's one of the reasons why we're 50th and everything. So this election this fall is going to be our best opportunity to finally do something about it. We've got a massive turnover in the legislature. I think it's 18 Senate seats are termed out of 39. 16. And we've got better than 40 House seats that are termed out as well. So we're going to have a whole bunch of new blood in the legislature. A lot of really good House members are now running for the Senate. The Senate is probably going to change. John Olario is termed out, which is a massive benefit to Louisiana. And so is Danny Martini, which might actually be even better. And the guy who's likely to win Martini's seat is Kirk Talbot, and I cannot tell you what an unbelievable seat change that would be to go from Danny Martini to Kirk Talbot in the Louisiana Senate. So the legislative elections, and there's going to be some competitive seats that we can't afford to lose, but the biggest seat that we can't afford to lose is the governor. And just to give you sort of like where we are with that, and then I guess we can kind of open the floor to some questions if y'all want. There was a poll late last week that Vern Kennedy did that suggested that John Bell Edwards was overly popular and had a 30-point lead over the Republicans running against him. And it got a lot of play in the media. I'm here to tell you, I don't even know what, they really offered very little details on the sample of that poll and how they arrived at those numbers. I've seen most of the other polls that I think are probably a little bit more independent and more perhaps reliable. And I can tell you, based on having looked at all these things, and even elements of what Vern Kennedy put out last week, I can tell you this. John Bell Edwards cannot get to 50%. He can't do it. There have been several polls done that sample Democrats as 50% of the electorate or more. Okay, in modern times, if you go back through the results at the Secretary of State's office, what you will see is the high water mark for Democrats as a share of the Louisiana electorate was 51.4% in November of 2015 when Edwards was running against Ritter. Okay, and that was when Republicans were largely despondent because we kind of like, we blew the election and we knew it. Everybody was, morale was very low. That was the high water mark. A bunch of these polls have been running their sample based on that number, okay? I can tell you that the average of gubernatorial elections in Louisiana, Democrats are no more than 46 or 47% of the electorate, okay? So if you have these things and you normalize them by this being a more kind of ordinary Louisiana election that's not driven on things like hookers, but it's more of an R versus a D type fight, you're probably going to look at a sample where these current polls are probably showing John Bell 3 or 4 points higher than it should be. In all of those polls that are oversampling Democrats, he's topping out at 46 or 47%. So he may actually be more like where Mary Landrieu was in 2014. If you remember, they had 3 people in that race. She had 2 Republicans and Mary Landrieu. And she beat Bill Cassidy in the primary 42 to 41, with Rob Maness getting about 14% of the vote. I don't want to sell Eddie Rispone short by any means, but we have 3 Republicans in the race. We've got a Democrat, or 2 Republicans in the race and a Democrat incumbent. You know, right now, before we see Eddie's big TV blitz that he's going to put on in a minute, he's running in and around 10%, Abraham's running in and around 30%, and the numbers look kind of similar to that 2014 Senate race. I don't know that it's going to stay that way, obviously, because once Eddie goes on TV, I would think he's going to pick up, and then you'll have a real fight among the 2 Republicans for who's going to be in the runoff. But either way it goes, you're still looking at a Democrat with a ceiling somewhere around 45%. And John Bell's people know this, which is why it kind of colors the way they're operating as they mount this re-election campaign. They're intensely negative, and they're intensely personal in how they attack both Eddie and Ralph. They have been doing everything they could to promote, like in Eddie's case, for example, some articles that the Bayou Brief, which is the sort of maybe left-wing version of the Hayride, I guess, they don't get anywhere near as much traffic as we do, but has absolutely gone after Eddie on some of the most flimsy and ridiculous ways that they probably could. I mean, they're talking about how, you know, he's made a whole bunch of money off of ITEP contracts in Louisiana that basically he's robbing the taxpayer to build industrial facilities, and it's the kind of thing you have to be half a communist to even think was worth writing down. But John Bell's people have pushed this. They've been after Abraham about missing votes in Congress on bills that Nancy Pelosi's been bringing, which, you know, string him up, I guess. So this is only going to get worse, and get ready for a really ugly campaign, but understand that whether it's Eddie or Ralph that makes the runoff, when it gets this bad, the reason is that John Bell Edwards cannot run on his own. We've lost 67,000 people to net out migration in 3 years. By the time it gets to 4 years, and that number does appear to be accelerating, so by the time he leaves office, it could very well be 100,000 less of us, or 100,000 more of us moving out than moving in, which is a devastating thing and probably will cost us a congressional seat at the next census. Our state's economy has shrunk 2 years out of the last 3. Last year it grew at 1.1%. Florida grew at 3.5. Texas grew at 3.2. and John Bel Edwards is running around talking about how Louisiana's economy is blowing and going. I mean, that's not what you would call high standards at work. So it's important that folks like us make sure that all of our friends know this, because one of the things that you've seen over the last 3 years for sure is that the mainstream media in this state absolutely refuses to accurately describe this guy's record. And they have treated him as though he is the very center of Louisiana politics in terms of ideology. And you know, everybody here I think knows that's not true. So it's going to be up to us to make sure our friends and neighbors, some of whom didn't want to vote for Vitter and cast a ballot for this guy, it's going to be up to us to make sure that that doesn't happen again. Good news is, if we do, we have 2 Republicans running, either one of which could do a sensational job as well. And neither one of which has ambitions beyond that job, which means that I think with either Eddie or Ralph, you can expect them to run out the ground balls and not be looking to the next seat, which has been a problem for us. So, let's keep hope alive. At this point, let me go ahead and take some questions if anybody's got some. Yes, ma'am. Debbie's got one. I anticipated this from you coming.
Yes. Okay, I do have one question to pose from our board, and then we'll open it up to the floor for questions. I do want to ask you all to make your questions short and direct, and not sort of comment on any burning issues, because we really want to hear from Scott. Okay? Okay. All right. It is obviously very good to know your opposition very well. So our question is, when we get to the runoff, tell us what you think John Bell's people will say his greatest strength is, and what do we know his greatest weakness is?
Well, they're going to say a couple things. Number one, they are going to tout his pro-life record, which he, I mean, you know, look, when he ran in 2015, the guy actually put a TV commercial out touting how pro-life he was because he wouldn't abort his own kids. And it was like, that's not the standard that you really go with, but it worked for him. But they're going to do a lot of that. He's going to offer a lot of anecdotal evidence of the state's economy getting better. I don't know how far they'll take that because it's not a factual statement. You know, I don't know, we'll see. I mean, a lot of what he's going to do is he's going to rely on the mainstream media to amplify attacks that they're going to put down against either Ralph or Eddie, whoever makes the wrong. Weaknesses, I mean, the number one weakness that this guy has, and you see it all the time if you pay attention, is that he lies. And he lies like about stuff where it's like, why would you want to lie about that? Because we already know you're lying and it's obvious. You know, I mean, look, the Advocate and the Picayune and some of the other mainstream media organizations in the state have been slavish in their devotion to this guy since he got elected. And yet, when he started taking credit for that Obamacare bill that he signed, I mean, the Advocates people and the Picayune's people jumped all the AP report that covers the Capitol. They all three jumped all over it. Like, you can't say that. You opposed that bill from the start. And I mean, it was flat out, flat out shameless in the way he did it. And I mean, you know, when he did, I was happy because I predicted he was going to do that. I predicted that he was going to flat out lie because politically he had nothing else to do. And you're going to see over and over things like that. Taking credit for things that Bobby Jindal did, which you've seen, like every ribbon cutting he does, he goes to some industrial plant and he's like, oh, this shows Louisiana's economy's going. And then you trace the origins of that plant opening or whatever it is. And it was an ITech deal that was done in 2013. So, you know, it's lots of participation trophies. But we'll see. I mean, I maintain that whoever gets in the runoff with him, this is going to look a lot like 2014 because it's, with either Ralph or Eddie, you've got somebody who's a straight up R versus D race at the end. There's no, you know, at this point, there's no evidence of some sort of smoking gun scandal type thing that can hit that would distract from the public policy aspects of the election. And when that's the case in Louisiana, the average number is about 56 or 57% of Republicans win. You can go back, you can look at John Kennedy against Foster Campbell in the Senate race in 16. You can look at Cassidy versus Mary Landrieu in 14. You can look at the other races statewide in 15. You can look at Kyle Ardoin against Gwen Collins-Greenham last year in the Secretary of State's race. You can look at John Schroeder against Derek Edwards in the Treasurer's race in 2017. Every one of them won with between 55 and 61% of the vote. Because this is a red state. And John Bell has got to make it so that something other than ideological political considerations color this race. I don't know what else there is. So, okay, to the floor, I guess. If anyone's got any questions, please feel free to fire away. Yes, sir.
I know this is a rabbit trail, but what would be elements of tort reform that would be an improvement to the insurance rates? You've got people involved here. How are you going to make people stop behaving like they're behaving?
Well, the question is what are the elements of tort reform that would actually lower car insurance rates? The business community, which touted this bill that Kurt Talbot brought, that had a number of elements to it. Essentially, the way they're looking at this is, we have a bunch of things that we do in tort law in Louisiana, which are different from lots of other states. One of which, I'm sure y'all have probably heard about, the jury trial threshold in Louisiana. And there's this debate about whether this has anything actually to do with whether car insurance rates rise or fall. But in Louisiana, you don't get access to a jury for whatever trial you're in until the amount of money in question is $50,000. That has us as an extreme outlier compared to the rest of the country. I think the next biggest jury trial threshold in America is $15,000, and something like 35 states or some number similar to that don't have any. Like, if whatever the amount is in question, you can have access to a jury. And the reason why that might lower car insurance rates is there are judges in Louisiana who are very friendly to plaintiffs. Like if you're in Orleans Parish, for example, I mean, every judge is a jackpot. And you might actually be better off if you're a defendant in a case like that in front of a jury. There's the same kind of judges in Baton Rouge at times. So that's one thought. Another thought, and this is something that actually the trial bar suggested, which is that we have a 1-year prescription for filing a lawsuit. So in other words, if you get in a car wreck, within a year of that, you have to file a suit against, you know, the other guy's insurance company or whatever. Most places in the country, that prescription is 2 years and not 1. So there is actually some agreement, I think, maybe across the divide on this, that that's something that'll get done next year, the year after, or something along those lines. You know, whether that works or not, I don't know. There's a number of other things that I could really drag this crowd into the weeds on. Like, for example, direct action, which is if you get in a lawsuit or get in a car wreck with somebody, you can directly sue their insurance company without suing them personally. And there's some thought that that encourages more lawsuits because you're not actually dragging somebody that maybe you'll know, or maybe you know people that they know. You know, you don't want to actually sue them, and this way it's a lot easier. And that's where a bit of an outlier as far as that. So there's a number of things, but I don't want to get too deep in the weeds on that. Yes, ma'am.
Haven't the lawyers thought having a law that says if you weren't wearing a seatbelt, you can't sue?
Yes. Yes.
The lawyers have thought that.
Yeah. Okay. So if you get in a car wreck and the other party is not wearing a seatbelt and they suffer damages that would be much worse than had they been wearing a seatbelt. In Louisiana, you are not, if the guy who's injured turns around and sues you, you are not allowed to bring evidence that the other guy wasn't wearing a seatbelt as an effort to reduce the damages. And the seatbelt gag order rule, I don't know how long this has been in place, but it's been there a while. I think it's been 3 or 4 years in a row that Sharon Hewitt, who's a state senator from Slidell or whatever.
St. Tammany,
St. Tammany, yeah.
Orleans, and St. Tammany.
Sharon has brought that bill, you know, every year for the last 3 or 4 years. And every year it goes in front of Senate Judiciary A, which is populated, I think 7 people on that committee and 5 of them are trial lawyers. And every year, that bill gets killed in that committee. Every year. So that's where we are. We are in a situation where you can not be wearing a seatbelt, get in a car wreck, sue for $500,000 for your injuries, and the other guy, their insurance company, just pays up because they can't introduce evidence that your damages basically came from your own lack of responsibility rather than what happened in the car wreck. And you wonder why you have the highest insurance rates in the country. It's not an accident. Yes, sir.
The local races, of course, are big, especially with the sheriff races. I'm concerned that this year, because there's over 18 open seats for sheriff, you have a huge voter participation in those the first primary election. I'm concerned that because of that additional turnout, especially with the Democratic side of the electorate, there's a possibility that Edward actually wins primary. Comment on that.
Well, I think our secret weapon that guarantees that won't happen is the first candidate who is up on television in this race. Believe it or not, that's not Ralph, it's not Eddie, and it's not John Bel Edwards. It's Gary Landry, who is on the air in New Orleans with an ad. Gary Landry is Mitch and Mary's cousin, about whom Mitch said, everybody's got a crazy relative. Gary's up on TV with an ad talking about how he will never allow anyone to tear down a statue ever again. He's also got another ad that's going to drop any minute that talks about how he's going to deport all illegal immigrants from Louisiana as governor. His name is Landry. There's not a single Republican voter in Louisiana that's going to vote for a Landry, okay? But remember this, last year a guy named Thomas Kennedy ran for Secretary of State and got 9% of the vote without spending a dime. Because people went up there and said, ooh, Kennedy, that must be John Kennedy, I'm going to vote for him. He got 9%. A.G. Crow spent something like $700,000 and he got half that. So, and you know, Cousin Gary said, I got $50 million worth of name ID and I'm going to town. So, this guy's going to get 4 or 5% of the vote. Like, doesn't deserve 4 or 5 votes. Remember, Gary Landry was the guy who got arrested because he was dragging a hooker by her hair behind his car. And the cops, that's who this guy is. He's nuts. He's totally nuts. But But he's going to run, and he's going to get 4 or 5%, and those are John Bell Edwards' voters. So I don't think he can get to 50. I think he can get to 45. I think he's probably going to do the 42 that Mary got in 14. And then we get to runoff, and there's no more Cousin Gary, unfortunately. And then it's a straight R versus D matchup. Now, that doesn't mean that Ralph and Eddie don't have to go and turn out every Republican voter for whichever one they're going to vote for. I mean, we've all got to get there and make sure that I'm not wrong. But as of right now, I think Cousin Gary is their secret weapon. Now, there's another piece to this too, which is that fetal heartbeat bill that passed. And I'll have you know, they begged this guy Milkovich, this Democrat senator from Shreveport, they begged him not to bring that bill this year. Begged him, and he wouldn't listen because he's crazy too. So he brings this bill, and there is nobody that wants to vote against it. It got 31 votes in the Senate, and it got 79 votes in the House, okay, which was a veto-proof majority. And John Bell goes and signs this thing. Well, John Bell's been saying he's pro-life all along. His party's not pro-life. Nationally, the Democrat Party has come out and said they are 100% pro-choice. So he goes and signs this bill and gets murdered on Twitter by his own people. And there's lots of rumors that you're going to get a female from New Orleans running on a pro-choice platform. And if that happens, this could get really interesting for the government election. I'm not guaranteeing that's the case, but there's lots of rumors that they're going to find somebody and put in the race. Yes, ma'am.
This isn't really a question, it's a statement. I don't know if any of you are aware of this, but New Orleans is a sanctuary city. It's a sanctuary city. Yeah. So it's the only part of Louisiana that is. So, you know, just keep that in mind, number one, if you're traveling down there. And number two, that's why the crime has increased in New Orleans, is because we got these illegal gang members, whatever, coming in. But it is a sanctuary city.
Well, okay. You want me to do something real quick on the St. George case, and then I can sit around?
Yeah.
Okay, so John Bell vetoes the bill on the St. George question, which was a very technical bill. Basically what it said was that if, in October, the St. George thing passes, the bill was an enabling legislation that would allow the new city to collect the 2% local sales tax. And it passed pretty overwhelmingly without a lot of opposition, other than Karen Carter Peterson flipping her wig and, you know, playing every race card in the deck. I mean, you know, went crazy. And John Bell vetoes the bill because Sharon Weston Broome asked him to. So what happens until somebody comes along and fixes it is, if you live in St. George, you get 2 cents off your sales tax. There's nobody to collect it, so you don't got to pay. So, like, it's a totally dysfunctional and stupid thing for him to have done. And what he's done is, depending on how much of this gets out, all the St. George people, he probably won't get too many of them anyway. But he's definitely not going to get any of them now. And you're probably going to see suburban voters from all over the state who have been paying attention to St. George, because the issues that are driving the St. George movement are similar issues that people are having everywhere. I mean, the Metairie people all know about this because they see dysfunctional government in Orleans Parish, just like South Baton Rouge people see in Baton Rouge. And people in Ascension and Livingston see, and they're like, that's why I moved out of there. People in Bossier feel the same way about Shreveport, and I mean, on and on and on. Everybody's actually paying attention. I've gotten more questions about that in the last couple of weeks from people not from Baton Rouge than I ever would have thought. So, and remember, John Bell got 51% of the vote in Jefferson Parish against David Vitter in November of 15. He got 52% of the vote in Ascension. So for him to veto this, he's kicking out a lot of voters that he has to have in an effort to maintain his base, because he didn't want to piss off Sharon Weston Broom when he needs her to turn vote out. So, I mean, he's beginning to get in an either-or situation on some of these things. And the St. George thing, I think, probably plays into that. Much more here than maybe around the state, but with a lot of suburban voters, I think they will keep that in mind. So I think it might be a thing. So, anyway, thank y'all for having me. Appreciate it.